welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look firstly at Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif's upcoming visit to Saudi Arabia. The visit is planned from the 28th to the 30th of April. A lot of things will be coming under discussion during this visit, along with bilateral relationship and, of course, the deferred payment facility regarding oil prices as well. We also understand that there are a number of other mutual interests that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan share, and this is going to be the first visit of the new leadership to any country. The relationship with Saudi Arabia, of course, is an important one. How this visit is going to impact the relationship further, particularly with reference to the energy crisis and fuel prices, and then, of course, other areas of mutual interest as well. This is what our first segment is going to be exploring today. In our second segment, we will be taking a look at the situation around the world with reference to the Ukrainian crisis and the Russian invasion. We've talked about how this is going to affect the food supply as well, but now we want to take a look at what the Russian side is claiming to be a real threat of the emergence of World War III, and whether or not that is there on the horizon. We have also seen that there has been a lot of support coming in for Ukraine in terms of military equipment as well from the US and other states as well, and whether or not that is going to push towards more escalation in the Ukrainian crisis and how the situation is going to evolve further. That is going to be the focus of our second segment today. For this and more, I've been joined in the studios as always by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment, we've been joined by telephone line by Khalid Al-Maini, who's a Saudi writer, a political and media analyst, and former editor-in-chief Arab News in Saudi Gazette. We've also been joined by Abdul Rahman Madar, who's an Arab journalist. He's joined us on Skype. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdul Rahman, for being with us as well, and Mr. Khalid Al-Maina. When we look at what has been going on with reference to Pakistan and Saudi relationship as well, of course, is an important one, as always, for Pakistan. And now when we look at the new leadership coming in, and with the new leadership taking in a renewed stance as to how to pursue this is, of course, going to be a very important visit, both in terms of how the new leadership is going to pursue this, and then, of course, how it's going to impact our relationship with Saudi Arabia as well. Faisal, this is going to be an important visit for the new leader, PM Shahbaz Sharif, and, of course, Pakistan as well. What do we hope to be the outcome of this visit?
Sana, obviously the very first thing which we are expecting is that, of course, the oil deferred payments, there will be an increase in the timeline, plus the quantity will be increased as well. This is what the government would be seeking from Saudi Arabia, and shouldn't be forgotten that this is a visit which is coming on in personal invitation of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So this is very important, and the timing is very important. Of course, there is a sort of change within Pakistan, a political change in Pakistan, and a very important inclusion to this will be obviously few personalities coming from UK, and we know that traditionally PMLN, they had very good relations with Saudi Arabia. So all of these things would be of keen interest to be looking at.
All right. And Farrukh, of course, when we look at this visit, it's going to be important for PMLN as well, because there has been talk about how perhaps a previous party had some contributions in making the relationship not as positive as we would have hoped for. Is there something that we can look at in terms of what is going to be a renewed commitments from the new political leadership in Pakistan to take the relationship forward?
Right. Sana, I usually, when it comes to foreign policy, I don't want to compare any government, right? I think that this is a very important relationship between two very important countries. Pakistan is the only Muslim country with nuclear bomb and a standing army which is sizable, right? Similarly, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, it is leader of Muslim world. We have seen the leadership in many shapes, and it keeps on shaping the narratives as well across the Muslim world. Now, what is important when you talk about that relationship, the first thing to look at is Pakistani diaspora. Pakistan's, working, expats in Saudi Arabia are to the tune of 2 million, and they send back home $5.8 billion per annum, right? That is one aspect. Then there is this commitment of investment also. in Gwadar, and of course umpteen other commitments as well. So it is important for every leader of Pakistan, whenever they take over, to first initially go to Saudi Arabia. It has been customary, like the US president goes to Canada most of the times, or for that matter UK. Our leaders go to China and our leaders go to Saudi Arabia.
Sure.
So that is the visit that actually underscores the most important relationship. But as was pointed out by Faisal as well, we are looking at the potential increase in the deferred payment system as well.
Absolutely. Mr. Abdul Rahman, when we look at the different aspects to which we're going to hope the relationship is going to move forward, particularly in terms of the deferred payment facility and the Pakistani workforce in Saudi Arabia as well, what do you think can actually immediately happen in the aftermath of this visit in terms of both these issues for Pakistan? Are we looking at an increase in the amount of the deferred facility provided by Saudi Arabia? Will this be an easy task?
I'd like to add also to what your guest already said regarding the visit of the Prime Minister to Saudi Arabia. I think the outcome should be beyond the bilateral relation between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And I think there is a lot of issues in the Muslim Ummah, which is a source of concern for both of the leadership in Islamabad and in Riyadh. Especially the issue of Palestine and the issue and the cause of Kashmir. Let us remember that Saudi Arabia is one of the largest trade partners to India, which is maybe something alarming here in Islamabad and Pakistan. So I think both of the leadership also should address the issues of the Muslim Ummah beyond their own bilateral relations. There is a lot of issues which needs a direct attention from both of the leadership in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And Palestine, Kashmir is on the top of the list of these issues. And I think there is a scope. There is a lot of understanding between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. We have seen that in the recent years. We have seen that in the recent decades, actually, between in the relation of Saudi and Pakistan. So there is a chance.
Right. Abdul Rahman Sahab, you just mentioned that Saudi Arabia trades with India as well. That gives Saudi Arabia a lot of leverage with the Indian government as well. Do you think that can also be used to help us get some solution regarding Kashmir?
This is the hope. I'm sure the new leadership here in Islamabad will be focusing on this issue, especially when, as I told you, Saudi Arabia is...
Right, but Mr. Abdul Rahman Sahab, what exactly do you think is the role that Saudi Arabia will be able to play in this regard?
There seems to be
I think we're experiencing a problem when we'll try to reconnect with him very soon. But Faisal, when we look at the different issues that Mr. Abdul Rahman was pointing at, of course, this points towards a much larger context in which we can see the relationship with other Muslim countries as well. And of course, Kashmir has always been an important issue for us. But when we look at the kind of role that we expect these countries to play, perhaps that is something that we can also still take a look into and see to it whether or not we can see a more tangible role played by not just Saudi Arabia, but other Muslim countries as well. Let me also welcome in the show Mr. Khalid Al-Maini, who's joined us on telephone line. Mr. Khalid, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, Mr. Khalid, we're talking about the visit of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif to Saudi Arabia and the kind of outcomes that we can hope for. We understand that there are some obvious concerns with regards to the energy crisis in Pakistan that we are hoping for, that we can get something out in terms of the deferred payment facility, and then also, of course, the Pakistani workforce there as well. But earlier we were talking to Mr. Abdul Rahman with reference to Kashmir as well, and perhaps how Saudi Arabia can also play its role with regards to resolving this crisis. What do you think can be the part that Saudi Arabia can actually play?
I think, first of all, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have got a long strategic, economic, and political relationship. And apart from that, the Kashmiri situation is a human rights situation. It has to be handled in a very delicate manner. It's a situation where there's such a lot of violence going on against the Kashmiris, and Pakistan is right when it voices concern because this could cause conflagration in the area. So Saudi Arabia, I think, should play the role of an honest broker. Now, we can't interfere directly. I'm not a government person, but I think it needs to be viewed from different aspects. The OIC should come in, the United Nations should come in, and there should be resolutions that really would push through and see to it that this unfortunate situation end up.
Mr. Khalid, if we look at obviously the situations in the Middle East as well, we know that traditionally Pakistan has always been extending sort of cooperation to Saudi Arabia in terms of security, in terms of defense. And of course, Pakistan's army, it had a long-standing, it always stood with Saudi Arabia. And right now, we know that Yemen crisis is a crisis that is a constant threat to Saudi Arabia. And we know that around a year and a half ago, Chief of the Army Staff of Indian Army, he visited Saudi Arabia, and at that time, a sort of a hit back to Pakistan's defense relations with Saudi Arabia took place at that time. Do you think that it would be revived once again, and the long-standing traditional cooperation between both of the countries would see a new dimension to it?
Well, frankly, inshallah, nothing has changed. Now, the visit of the Indian defense chief or the commander-in-chief was, I think, a routine visit. He must have come because they rarely come here. I agree with you, and since they rarely come here, it raised quite a few eyebrows in Pakistan and raised concern. But I don't think so that it will in any way Saudi Arabia is going to let go of Pakistan. Yemen, yes, Yemen, has been going on, unfortunately, and I say it as an analyst and an academic. The problem also that the Yemenis are not getting together for a dialogue, and that makes it difficult. And Saudi Arabia does not want an unstable, insecure, violent neighbor on any side. This is very important. Remember, Hajis come here, pilgrims come here. We don't want any bombs to be thrown or some things to be thrown. As you saw yesterday, I saw when that Balochi woman blew up that Chinese gentleman. So this is why Saudi Arabia's concern was to have a stable Yemen. But I don't think so that the relationships have gone so bad or have gone backward that we need to revitalize it. Yes,
right.
I believe
and,
the Saudi-Pakistan relation.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. Al-Maina, as a follower of your work and admirer as well, let me ask you if you could actually speak to the importance of this relationship, the broader contours, what actually keeps these two countries together, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. We have seen occasional highs and lows, but usually they are together on the same side of the divide. One, that is important. Could you actually underscore that? And secondly, could you also talk about the potential of cooperation between the two countries?
The potential for cooperation will be economic. I'll be very frank with you. The other side, is coming up with economic packages. Not that they give it to us. I truly believe, you see, the view from Pakistan, if viewed from an economic viewpoint, from projects and all, it would be a great thing. I've always been an admirer. The Pakistanis have played a great role in the electricity buildings in the 50s and 60s. They've done that through cooperation with the armed forces, and the list goes on and on. But right now we would like to see a more vibrant economic Pakistan. And this is important. Good economics makes good politics. So hopefully some joint projects will be there that will get both heads together and look in the same direction.
Right. Mr. Abdurrahman, when we talked about how, of course, there are much larger issues also, and perhaps issues of concern to all Muslim countries is what we can also be able to pursue. One of them, of course, has been Islamophobia as well, that had been taken up by the previous leadership in Pakistan as well, and it's an important cause for the entire Muslim Ummah as well. But there have been a lot of issues with reference to how this is going to be pursued, or what exactly is going to be the areas or the measures that will be taken taken by the Muslim countries to actually counter this well. We understand the win at the UN, but at the end of the day, the kind of work that needs to be put forward requires the support from all Muslim countries. Do you think that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia can perhaps take the leadership in this, and Saudi Arabia's role in terms of all the Muslim countries getting together for a united stance on this will be fruitful?
Well, if you're asking me that question, I think yes, they should do. But I always take the two steps ahead instead of one. I truly believe that the non-government agencies, the NGOs, other organizations should take a step. Look what's happening in the States. Look what's happening your Western neighbors are doing now through organization and lobbies and all. Yes, you need the approval of the government, not approval, let's say the acceptance.
Maybe there will be some kind of understanding between Riyadh and Islamabad regarding how to address these issues within the limits of the United Nations and the OIC. As all of us know, that there is a lot of resolution which has been passed by the United Nations and by the OIC as well. And there is a lot of other countries who are not willing to accept these resolutions regarding the Kashmir issue and the Palestinian issue. And I am sure that Israel and India are not willing to accept any of these resolutions. So I'm sure that there is a lot of challenge now facing Saudi Arabia and Pakistan regarding the Muslim Ummah issues, how to tackle these issues, how to deal with them, especially when there's a lot of denial by Israel and by India.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Al-Maina, I'll come back to you. Unfortunately, we were not able to hear Mr. Abdul Rahman's comments on this as well. Mr. Abdul Rahman, if you can kindly also repeat what you were saying earlier.
I'm saying that this is important visit of the new leadership here in Islamabad, and I'm sure that they will be discussing the bilateral relation in this level, in this stage, in this first visit. But I hope that there will be a time to discuss about the other issues regarding the Muslim Ummah, and I am sure that based on the relation, the historical relations between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, they both of the leadership in both of the countries will be able, and there will be a chance for them to work together to try to work within the limits of the United Nations and the OIC. How to force, the challenge will be how to force Israel and India to implement these already passed resolutions regarding Palestine and Kashmir. There is a lot of resolutions, as all of us know, regarding Palestine and Kashmir, but there is a denial as well. None of these two countries are willing to implement those resolutions.
Right, Mr. Mata, since we are talking about Islamophobia, that essentially, while it also, projects the Muslim countries in negative light, it also affects the people who are living in the West or elsewhere in non-Muslim countries. The question at this moment is, since it doesn't directly affect the lives of a Muslim heartland, how important do you think it is a priority of Muslim leadership around the world? Islamophobia.
No doubt there is a lot of issues, and there is, in the same time, there is a lot of hopes in the Muslim Ummah, especially among the people in the Muslim Ummah, not only in these two countries, but beyond these two countries as well. There is a lot of hopes, and people always looking to this leadership that the biggest country and the strongest country, when they are cooperating, definitely there will be some kind of at least a hope among the people, how that these two leadership will be able to discuss and talk about their issues, talk to the concerned capital around the world, make a pressure and on the international community to address these long-standing issues. Palestine issue is an issue since the last 7 decades. It's similar the case of Kashmir. It is since maybe 70 or maybe more than 70 years. And there is a lot of hopes among the people in the Muslim Ummah that these leadership should be talking and should be working to resolve these issues.
Exactly. Mr. Al-Maina, recently, I think a month ago, we heard from the news that Saudi Arabia will be selling oil to China in yuan rather than in dollars. So in coming future, we are seeing that Saudi Arabia would be maintaining a very good economic relation with China, and that too, of course, through CPAC. So could we say that in coming years, Pakistan can play an excellent role of a bridge between Saudi Arabia and China, plus between the Gulf countries and China?
And could you also add to this the question about the fate of promised investment in Gwadar of establishing a refinery that was going to complement the CPEC, particularly when it comes to energy sources going into China?
I think, of course, Pakistan can play a pivotal role in sort of doing so many things to ease the transition to have better relations or stronger relations. But at the same time, I think now countries are having direct talks. This is not the era of in 72 and Kissinger and Mao Zedong and Nixon and ping-pong diplomacy. I do agree, but I think, yes, a strong, secure, stable Pakistan, economically strong also, will play a great role. It will be a bridge between the Gulf states and other states in Southeast Asia.
Mr. Maina, while diplomacy can be direct, and I understand now countries even tweet at each other, but the question is that energy sources actually cannot be directly sent to one another. They'll need channels. So CPEC and the commitment of investing $10 billion in Gwadar to establish a refinery was a big one that was made in 2019. Do you think that that is going to progress in coming days as well?
Wallah, inshallah, I'm not privy to what's going on. Things have changed, but I do hope, since there was a commitment made and there was a talk about it, I think follow-ups. The problem is that in many of the Arab and Muslim countries, there are not many follow-ups. But I think there should be. And again, the security situation also needs to be reviewed, because every now and then one hears about incidents here and there. But I'm sure Gwadar can also be a strong bridge and act as a go-between for Gulf energy to go to China, save time, space, money. Yes, it can happen. But I think both sides need to come up and reignite these talks.
Right. Mr. Almeida, earlier you were talking about the OIC as well, and Pakistan has recently hosted the OIC twice as well, with the foreign ministers coming in and talking about the issue of humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. But that also points towards the larger role that perhaps the OIC can play in terms of addressing issues in different countries, in Muslim countries, and around the world as well, issues that concern Muslims around the world. But essentially, of course, the OIC is as strong as its countries. And we need a lot of things to be perhaps on the same page for the OIC to actually take up agendas and be useful for the countries it is made for. Do you think that Saudi Arabia can perhaps have a stronger commitment or role to play in terms of emboldening OIC as a body, providing it with the kind of framework that it needs to move forward, not just with reference to issues like Islamophobia that we were discussing earlier, but any and every issue that concerns Muslim countries? Especially
a structure within OIC.
I think, yes. I think as the United Nations restructures itself, I think the OIC also should do a bit of restructuring, KPIs, management, and find out of how they can be a more effective body rather than just taking out statements of condemnation and alarm. Yes, I do agree. I think that the people in the OIC, and I also, as somebody who has had close dealings with the OIC, I mean, just as an observer, the people who are sent from the countries to represent the OIC should have that, fire in their belly. They should be a bit tough. They should look upon it as a mission rather just as a diplomatic posting where one can go and come. If that is done, the commitment.
Yeah, Mr. Al-Maina, if we are looking at, of course, the advent of Gwadar and the kind of work they're going on, of course, it is becoming a reality now. So could we, incoming future, could we see GCC +1 in shape of Gwadar becoming, or Pakistan becoming part of the GCC states?
Well, it's too early. They haven't even taken some of the Arab countries. I mean, still, Iraq was supposed to have come, if you remember, in 1981. The Yemen case, and also, if it could be GCC +1 on an economic basis, yes, to have fair trade and to have other forms of, transactions, not necessarily be directly as a GCC member, but as the most favored nation status. I mean, everything is possible with the world changing so fast and the geopolitical associations also being topsy-turvy. I think, yes, that can happen.
Right.
Right.
One problem with the whole idea of GCC plus one is the G in it, that is Gulf. You have to have physical contact with the Gulf to actually
So
call
Gwadar might
yourself.
have. Gwadar might have.
No, Gwadar doesn't.
All right.
Yeah. Physically, unless you have changing the, geography,
But
it is not
still
the
you
case.
can say GCC plus have some, economic relations they can. I mean, you can always divide. Where there's a will, there's a way. They could do that. But again, Pakistan, and I'm being very frank with you, needs to do a lot of soul searching within themselves on the domestic front and also on the economic and other fronts. So yes, they can present Gwadar as a case, as a shining example of economic growth and an economic platform.
Right. Mr. Maina, can I ask you to act as an advisor right now and help us understand how to pitch Pakistan's economic worth to these countries? What are the things that Pakistan can actually go out and pitch to all our Arab brethren, particularly Gulf countries, that this is the potential, come and invest, so that Pakistan really gains that kind of economic centrality in these affairs?
A good question. You've got some great people there. You've got great industries. I truly believe that your captains of business and industry, and there are many of them there, should really highlight this case, make a roadshow for Pakistan. And I'm not saying just send some 5 or 6 people down there or middle-class management. No, they should have great openings, invite people there, tell them what you have. So the investments there, people are investing in Jamaica and they're investing in the Solomon Islands. Pakistan is just a stone's throw away. It's a brotherly country. It's a friendly country. And I think that should be
absolutely,
our
Mr.
first stop.
Almeida, that of course is very important, and we're almost out of time, so we'll have to conclude here. But I'll just take last words in from Mr. Abdur Rahman as well, with regards to not just our visit and our relationship, but in general Saudi Arabia's role in different issues around the world. Yes, Mr. Abdur Rahman. Mr. Abdur
Sorry,
Rahman.
again, your voice was not so clear.
You'll have to repeat the question.
Right, Mr. Abdur Rahman, we're almost about to conclude. I just wanted your take in as well with reference to not just Pakistan's relation with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia's role in general, particularly with reference to issues concerning Muslim countries. What more do you think can be done?
There is a lot of things to be done. There should be some kind of a frank talking between the two leadership. They should understand each other's situation, and they should really debate on how to resolve these issues. They should understand in deeply what is the concerns of the people in different countries. By understanding this in deeply, I am sure that they are wise enough to reach to a legitimate kind of resolution which can really benefit
and
each
that is the
party
hope. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdur Rahman Matar, for joining us, and Mr. Khalid Al-Maina for being with us as part of the debate and talking to us with reference to Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif's visit to Saudi Arabia, and then, of course, our relationship with Saudi Arabia and how that's going to be impactful, not just in terms of our relationship, but around the world as well, and issues concerning Muslim countries. What also concerns us globally is, of course, the Ukrainian crisis and what's going on with reference to Russian invasion, something that has had an impact on countries around the world, especially developing countries as well, not just on an economic front, but also in the way that now we're hearing from the Russian side the potential threat of a possible outbreak of World War III. And they've been reassuring the reality that exists in terms of how this is something that is not an illusion, but the threat is very, very real. This is something we've talked about before, but we want to also understand now in terms of how aid and equipment equipment is being given to Ukraine by the United States and other countries as well, whether or not potentially this is something that can escalate into World War III. Faisal, we've been hearing this from the Russian side, and earlier we talked about in the very initial times of the Ukrainian crisis that perhaps this was a far-fetched conclusion to draw at the moment, and perhaps we're not going to be able to see such an escalation. But now things seems to be a little bit different. Do you think that the statements that have been coming in from the Russian side are just rhetoric, or do we have an actual threat looming?
Sana, in the current scenario, of course, we have an actual threat which is looming, and that threat needs to be countered, but not through the ways which are being used by US. Of course, in the weekend, of course, Lloyd Austin, he visited Kiev, and he pledged $800 million worth of the further arms to that would only escalate the things. And I think right now, rather than investing on arms, they need to be investing to look for the ways to attain peace in the region. And of course, it is being considered as a ticking bomb because we know that a missile was tested by Russia last week, and that is a new threat to all of the European countries, and of course all of the European countries are concerned about it as well. The only table can bring peace, not all of these trips and pledging $800 worth of arms. It won't work.
Right. But of course, we're facing issues on that front as well. Let me just welcome Tom O'Connor as well, who's joined us. He's a senior journalist. He's joined us online on the debate. Thank you very much, Tom, for being a part of the show. We were discussing whether or not the statements that have been coming in from the Russian side about a possible outbreak of World War III is something that is to be taken seriously now that the situation is where it stands. And if it is so, why isn't there perhaps more urgent measures taken in terms of de-escalation or a political dialogue? And if the real issue at hand at the moment is that the measures or any initiatives for a potential dialogue are failing, or there is Russian refusal in this regard, then how are we going to proceed in this front? And
Tom, while you are at it, I would like you to actually address another very important question. What is the bigger threat at this moment? Another world war, or the fact that there is a possibility that this might actually transform into another Cold War, and that actually keeps on destroying generations?
Sure, absolutely, yes. Well, these are great questions, and they're very serious questions, because we have to remember that even before this conflict broke out, Russia's strategy was always to emphasize the threat that any direct confrontation between Russia and the United States or other NATO powers could result in a world war with nuclear escalation. This is something that I do believe is very real. And it was just a few weeks ago, the Russian ambassador told me actually that even weapons shipments could lead to a direct confrontation between Russia and the US, something that we have to remember even President Biden said would lead to World War III. He was the first one to discuss World War III in the context of this conflict, actually. But he was addressing a broader concern, which is something that I think many Americans share, and that's exactly what Russia's trying to do here, is to broadcast these concerns to make them real, not just for U.S. leadership, but for U.S. citizens too, because if U.S. citizens fear that if Kyiv could be taken, would they trade New York or Los Angeles for Kyiv? And now we're not even talking about Kyiv anymore. We're talking about Donetsk or Mariupol, and cities that Americans probably didn't even hear about before this conflict. So this is really, I think, the strategy here is to make people in the United States and the West broadly reconsider how much they want their countries to really get mired in this conflict. And I think it is a real concern because Russia, of course, is a nuclear power. And I take President Putin at his word. I take Foreign Minister Lavrov at his word when they talk about these sort of things.
Tom, can we consider America has failed diplomatically? That is why it is extending arms to Kiev?
Well, here's the other concern right here. When Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin talked about weakening Russia, this plays right into, I think, Russia's strategy of depicting this conflict as one that was imposed on Russia by the U.S. and NATO rather than Russia imposing it on Ukraine. So we have to ask ourselves, is the U.S. strategy here to save Ukraine or to defend Ukraine, or is it really to weaken Russia, to make Russia a weaker state as far as geopolitics go? And so if that's the case, then diplomacy really isn't a priority, and that's the concern here. Now, the U.S., of course, has said that we will support Ukraine diplomatically, but But right now, that diplomacy that we saw taking place between Ukraine and Russia directly is really not making any progress these days. We know what Russia is asking for, at least on paper, which is Ukrainian recognition of Crimea, recognition of the independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, non-nuclear and non-NATO status for Ukraine itself, and of course the demilitarization and denazification goals as well, which I think are a bit less, bit more intangible. But of course that could be interpreted in different ways. So I think that's where we are as far as the progress of the diplomacy. But we're not really seeing any major initiatives there. We're seeing a lot of stalling and actual conflict.
I'm a little bit perplexed when listening to Faisal and then you as well, because of this, equivalence between the two situations. On one side, there's a country which has literally invaded another one. It has its hand in the proverbial cookie jar. At that time, we are talking about the need for the US leaders to censor their language. How does that work?
Well, I think it's in the interest of what you mentioned earlier, which was de-escalation. And de-escalation is something that I think is very important when we're dealing with major powers here. It's one thing to sit there and acquiesce to Russia's demands if obviously the U.S. views Ukraine as a critical partner and as potentially a tripwire for a larger conflict. Of course, I understand why the U.S. would want to defend Ukraine. But at the same time, if the mutual interest between the U.S. and Ukraine here is for this conflict to end, it will have to end in a settlement. That's just the facts, and President Zelensky has said so as well. So we need to move towards a diplomatic solution here. I know that many people are discussing the off-ramp, but I still believe that is the case here. I think we do need an off-ramp to stop further escalation in this conflict. We've seen Russia change its military goals from the center of...
And I understand that, Tom, but when we talk about de-escalation and perhaps dialogue as well as the only way forward, there also needs to be perhaps a realistic account of what is going on. There has been efforts towards dialogue, there have been refusals, there has been no progress. When we look at the way the situation is, and then perhaps when you're talking about different agendas that countries might have, we've talked about how Putin has his own agenda, and there's been so many sanctions as a way to perhaps deter or de-escalate the conflicts, which are also not having a positive impact on de-escalation. Then what options are really left on the table? And then the kind of actions that have been taken by the United States or perhaps different countries to support Ukraine. In terms of all of this, how do we see whether whatever measure is being taken is actually going to help de-escalate the crisis?
You know, it's a very good question, and it's a difficult one, because right now we are seeing this conflict escalating in some senses, but at the same time we have to look at what's going on the ground. We have to look at the facts, and we've seen Russia walk back at least what appears to be more maximalist goals of taking Kyiv and now focusing more on the east and southern Ukraine. Of course, this is still very important for Ukraine. They don't want to cede this territory, but we have to look that Russia is already it looks like it's not being able to accomplish its original goals, if those were its original goals, of course. And so we are seeing somewhat of a more limited conflict already taking place. I mean, if you remember, before this conflict broke out in the very early stages, we were talking about the entirety of Ukraine, perhaps, or at least much of Ukraine, being taken in a matter of a week or two. And now we're months into this conflict, and that's just not the case. So what I think, to go back to the earlier question about a more protracted crisis, a potential Cold War situation, I think that we might be walking into that territory more, where we see a frozen conflict. Right. We have to remember Donbass was at war.
Okay.
And thank you for saying that, but that actually takes me back to the history of the Cold War. Russia has this long history of flirting with the idea of a third world war while actually continuing the Cold War, and this dance has continued before our eyes for generations, right? Do you think that at this moment something has changed? Because in the past, when Soviet Union was there was a Politburo and there was some mechanism of filtering, and now there's only one man who's calling the shots.
Yeah, so I think that, speaking to Russia's strategy specifically, I think that creating those frozen conflicts and supporting separatists in places like Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine most recently, I think really the idea behind that is to prevent these countries from wanting to join NATO or being able to join NATO, really, because NATO would not likely take in a country as a member that has Russian troops on its soil. So I think that's the strategy there. And we could see that remain in Ukraine, too. When it comes to Russia's decision-making right now under President Putin, yes, I agree. I think it's a very tight inner circle that really just ends with Putin himself. I think that he really is calling the shots right now, and at the end of the day, it will be up to him when he decides to end this conflict and settle for any sort of solution.
All right. Tom, there's also the planning of a security summit being held with 40 countries involved to discuss this crisis and then to discuss further arms to Ukraine as well. Do you think potentially that this summit can also be discussing ways to de-escalate the crisis and move towards dialogue? And also simultaneously, we're expecting a meeting between Putin and his Turkish counterpart as well. And earlier also Turkey has tried to play a role as a mediator. Do you think that perhaps we can see anything positive coming out of that?
Well, on the first question, I would hope that some of this diplomacy would be geared, and some of these talks would be geared towards figuring out if there is a solution that could be found. I mean, the other risk that we run here is that we are seeing other countries have their own agendas, even within the US/NATO camp right now. We're seeing Germany and France and various countries, and this, I think, these fissures, I think, will expand as this conflict gets more protracted, more prolonged, as the economic effects set in. Of course, there is a lot of victory right now that US and NATO can claim for coalescing. But right now we have to keep an eye on that because countries will act in their own interest. I think it's their right to do so. And right now we could see the beginnings of what could be different agendas, and that could, I think, cause an issue with the U.S. NATO camp. Now, when it comes actually to any mediation efforts, we've seen many countries try to mediate. We've seen Israel, we've seen Belarus in the early stages, we've seen Turkey, of course. Pakistan had offered at times. A lot of countries want to be in the middle of this. They feel like they can save the world in a sense. And I think Turkey actually did a pretty admirable effort by hosting the talks that I think made the most progress so far. But I'm not sure at this stage really whether an mediated effort, it's really going to have to come down, I think, to Russia and Ukraine themselves and what they bring to the table. And where that table is, I think, plays less of a role.
Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us and being a part of the show. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate. Yes, Farrukh, I believe you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you, yesterday when we were discussing all this, I actually brought up the comparison with the First World War and the fear that any miscalculation can actually lead to some kind of prolonged and big conflict, bigger than the region itself. But here's another problem that I've got with this idea of the need to de-escalate no matter what. And that is this ability of ours to stigmatize, not the mark of Cain, but Abel the slain, right? Never to sympathize with the victim. At this moment, we know what is going on in Ukraine, how Mariupol has been, destroyed.
Yes.
And it is important because every time India and Pakistan used to have a fight, India was aggressor, and the world community would impose sanctions on both, right? You are not rewarding or punishing the aggressor. Why are you actually punishing the victim as well? So this is important, that you cannot leave or forego the moral high ground just to ensure that there is a possibility of some kind of end of violence, because then you generate or create monsters like Hitler.
Absolutely, and that is absolutely correct. But with reference to what is going on in Ukraine, we can really only hope that it de-escalates because it's not just Ukraine or Russia or the US who cannot afford a world war. None of us can, and we really hope it doesn't come to that. Thank you very much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.
Salara yaar machhar phir